For Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Dayton state officials and advocates held a press conference to press for more funding for broadband expansion. While 88% of Minnesotans now have access to high-speed internet, Governor Dayton is requesting an additional $30 million to reach those in greater Minnesota who still need it. Afterwards, Governor Dayton took questions from the press on other topics. Here's that press conference.
This place is thinning out. We're either going to have to stop doing these every day or get past the break. Whatever. Everybody's kids are on break. So, as I've driven all over our state, I've experienced firsthand the erratic high-speed internet and cell phone coverage, especially in parts of greater Minnesota. If Minnesotans are to choose where they want to live and work, reliable access to high-speed communications is absolutely essential. When I campaigned in 2010, I called for, quote, border-to-border broadband and cell phone coverage. When we finally pulled the state budget out of its chronic deficits, I started asking the legislature to provide the funding necessary to extend broadband to underserved and unserved areas in our state. During the past 4 years, my budgets have called for $211 million in broadband funding. Unfortunately, the legislature has provided less than half that amount. Dana McKenzie is here, the director of the state's Office of Broadband Development, who from all accounts has done a fantastic job leading this effort, can provide details on what has been funded and what, due to inadequate funding, could not be funded. Also, since she still commutes weekly from Grand Marais, where she lives, you can talk about some of the problems that are caused by the inconsistency of broadband coverage. I've heard from some of the resorts and lodges up there that one has it and another one doesn't. It makes a big difference. But even with this lack of adequate funding, the office's funds have expanded broadband access to 33,852 households, 5,189 businesses, and 300 community institutions all over Minnesota. My supplemental budget now includes an additional $30 million for broadband development grants, which would expand broadband access to another 11,100 households, businesses, and community institutions in Minnesota. If the legislature is serious about improving the climate for job creation statewide, especially in our more rural areas, this additional funding is essential. It's even more important than funding tax breaks for premium cigars. That'll turn it over to Commissioner Hardy.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. As the Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, I consider broadband to be one of Minnesota's most crucial economic development tools. High-speed internet is not only important for improving the quality of life of our residents, particularly in greater Minnesota, but it's critical for attracting businesses, creating educational opportunities for the young and the seasoned, and improving career pathways programs throughout the state. High-speed internet is no longer a luxury. It is a necessity that all Minnesotans must have access to compete in this modern and high-tech economy. Communities with high-speed internet have an advantage when it comes to attracting businesses, to recruiting new businesses, to attracting residents, delivering medical services, and helping existing businesses to expand and to compete. Yes, we have made progress in the recent years expanding access. Since the Office of Broadband Development was created by the legislature in 2013, we provided approximately $85.6 million in funding that has expanded broadband access to nearly 34,000 households, 5,200 businesses, and 300 community institutions throughout greater Minnesota. When Governor Dayton took office in 2011, only 56% of Minnesotans had access to high-speed internet, mostly in our urban communities. Today, thanks to funding from the Border-to-Border Broadband Grant Program, more than $110.6 million in private investments has been leveraged. 88% of Minnesotans have access to internet connections. However, our work is not done. We must continue to invest in the 1/4 of rural Minnesotans that still lack services. Up to this point, we've been only able to provide support to 110 of the 211 groups that have applied for funding. We can't let the demand for funding limit our progress and stand in the way of us continuing to be competitive. Governor Dayton's proposal for another $30 million in investment will lead the way, will help over 11,000 Minnesotans get access to greater high-speed service. In closing, I also want to thank Dana McKenzie and her team for their diligence in running this program, and also thank Margaret Anderson Kelleher and the active members of the Governor's Broadband Workforce Task Force for their leadership and commitment to access. I look forward to working with the legislature and the governor this session to make these much-needed investments, not only for broadband infrastructure, but for the future of our state. Together, we can move closer to achieving our ultimate goal of making high-speed internet available to every home and business in Minnesota by 2020. Let's keep investing. I'll turn the mic over to Dana to provide you more detail.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner. Governor Dayton, I bring thank yous from the thousands of families that have been helped over the past 4 years through the Border-to-Border Grant Program. We receive calls every week, both from the families and businesses who've been served by this program, as well as those who hope to be next in line. They all want us to know one thing, that the $85 million that's been invested so far is going to good use. And they ask us to keep making these critical investments in their future. They remind us the significant cost to their communities of waiting too long to close the gaps. The voices we're hearing from are people trying to run their farm in Roseau, or trying to make their living working from the Mayo Clinic from home, or trying to provide equal access to education for their kids at home. We're hearing from rural entrepreneurs who are not able to deliver their digital products to market. We're also hearing from new homeowners who are stunned when they find there isn't reliable service available, as well as the realtors who are having difficulty selling homes that do not have access. I've also been asked to deliver thanks from dozens of communities around the state and their broadband providers for creating a financial tool that allows them to say yes when they get calls for service from some of those toughest to serve neighborhoods. Over the last 4 years, this program has evolved into a celebrated example of how public-private partnerships can really work to serve the needs of rural businesses and families. A week doesn't go by without a call from another state or a federal agency that wants to talk about how the Minnesota policies and programs are working together to support communities and helping broadband providers meet the border-to-border challenge. We're fortunate today to have with us a representative from a community that is doing that work and stepping up to bring service to the unserved homes in his area, and who has firsthand experience of what their program means to rural Minnesotans. And with that, I would turn it over to Dave Wolf.
Thank you, Dana. Good morning. I'm Dave Wolf, and I'm honored to be here today to share a little bit about our story. I run a 75-year-old communications cooperative located in Brandon, Minnesota. We provide voice, video, data, and wireless services to residents and businesses around the Alexandria area. Over the past several years, Gardenville has been awarded 3 of the 5 border-to-border grant applications we have submitted, totaling roughly $500,000 in total investment to 101 locations. Gardenville was formed many years ago to solve a community problem, bringing in voice service. The border-to-border grant program has helped Gardenville continue that mission by helping to offset the economic challenges we face in delivering broadband to rural residences. From apples to eggs to milk to walnuts to vinegar, delivering goods from farm to market requires more than roads and electricity. It requires broadband, a rural broadband strategy that includes a partnership between the state and the service provider is solving the how, and it's created examples of success that other states will certainly follow. The 3 projects we were awarded will provide broadband to doctors from our local hospital that need to have the ability to work from home. Retaining doctors certainly has helped our community. We will now be providing broadband to a number of eager and excited homeschool children. We'll be bringing broadband into a daycare learning center. There's also a number of work-from-home customers we will be providing broadband to. From school superintendents to IT consultants to dairy consultants, we are creating an impact on our local economy while solving a difficult problem. These problems or these projects would not have happened without the help of the OBD and the border-to-border grant program. It is making a difference and it works. But the work isn't done. We're not taking the elevator, we're taking the stairs in this one step at a time. We're going to continue to invest along with the state until we reach our goal of broadband from border to border. Thank you very much.
Questions on this subject?
There are several counties on this map that don't have markings. Can somebody explain, are they doing broadband on their own? Do they not get the grants? Do they not want them?
Yes, in most cases, the areas where you do not see dots are, flags are areas where the vast majority of households are already served. Particularly in the north and northeast parts of the state, those areas have a high concentration of fiber to the home.
And while you're up there, do you have any estimate about how much money has been used to develop broadband, state and federal funds plus private?
That is a difficult number because the private number isn't always available. I can get back to you with the numbers that we do have.
What is the percentage of the households that's currently broadband is available? I know there are various different standards, but at least the minimum acceptable standard. What's the percentage and how much more money is necessary to get there? I understand the governor is proposing 30, but I assume there's more beyond that would be necessary to judge the...
Absolutely. When we started this work, the percentage was at 56% of the households met the then current speed goal FCC standard. The FCC standard and also the state speed goal, which the border-to-border program is based around getting everyone access to service at 25 megabits download by 3 megabits upload. And
what year when the number is 56%?
2011. And we are now at approximately 88% statewide. And again, that's at the state speed goal for wired service.
What is it going to cost to get that additional 12% or up to, whatever, asymptotically 99.99%?
And as I referred earlier, that's a difficult number to pin down because there are always continuing to be private investments and shifting federal policy, and it's not always clear how the rules of the federal policy will make those funds available to those in Minnesota doing this work. But factoring in what we do know about those other factors, the Broadband Task Force made a recommendation of allocating $71 million per biennium until the goal date. And we anticipate that the state would meet the border-to-border 2022 speed goal with that level of investment.
2022.
2022 at 25 by 3.
And the governor...
Let me just add, as Dan said, states provide about $86 million in funding so far, and I have requested from the legislature up through the end of 2017, $211 million. So do the math, that's $125 million unfunded by the legislature, and you can then more than double the results we've achieved so far, which should be this progress we haven't achieved because of the lack of adequate funding.
Are you, being at 88% of households served, are you reaching a point where it's getting more difficult and more expensive to reach these more sparsely populated areas of the state?
Please.
Absolutely. We're seeing the confluence of different factors. Yes, we are now at the point where we are getting into the 10% rule of the most difficult and most expensive to serve. But we are also seeing technologies and strategies evolve over time as well. We're seeing unique financial partnerships that are involving multiple financial partners, local financial, private, state, and federal, braiding all of those things together to get to these hardest to serve places, as well as new technologies. Wireless has certainly come up in the conversation about policy. Minnesota's policy is currently written around wired service, but we're seeing providers experiment with hybrid solutions where they're pushing fiber deeper and then using some new forms of wireless to reach those final difficult to serve homes.
You want to comment on your hard to reach areas?
Absolutely.
Those are the two grants that were not funded, is that? Okay.
Well, the hard-to-reach areas are often served by price cap carriers that may not have the ability to develop those markets because it's incredibly cost prohibitive. So you may have somebody living in a very rural area that's surrounded by lakes or has a lot of rock in it, or it's an isolated area that may be gravel road for 3 miles. And that is our market space. So we blend technologies from wireless to fiber to get them lit up, but without a public-private partnership, it's almost impossible to recover that investment.
This is, I think, a question about the governor, but keying off what you said, sir. Do we reach the point of diminishing returns at some point, Governor? Is it government's obligation to extend this broadband net to every remote person way back in the woods somewhere at a tremendous expense?
Well, my friend Will Seeger lived next to Backwoods Bob, about north of Ely, and he had a solar unit that could, if it was sunny, fund power half of a football game, and no other communications. So, it's not going to reach everybody, obviously. But as Dana said, there's a law of diminishing returns. So, when we get to that point when we're trying to reach the Backwood Bobs, then, somebody can say we've succeeded. But until then, there's still areas that are populated and where people want to live. That's the thing. If you want people to be able to choose to live in more rural parts of our state, which many people do, then you have to provide them with access to the world. And if you do that, they can run a small business from their home. They can run public relations firms from small communities. As Dana said, doctors and hospitals and patients can communicate with one another. I mean, it's just students all over can learn worldwide. It opens up all these vistas and you find areas, maybe Danny, you can comment, but when I was up in the Lutz and Grand Marais area a couple of years ago, I met with resorters and lodge owners, and one would have broadband and one just 3 or 4 miles away would not. And I've experienced that driving around the state. You have it, and suddenly you just cross some line, invisible line, and you don't. And so that inequity really affects the socioeconomic dynamics as well. I don't know if you want to comment on that. I don't see any flags up there for Lake and Cook counties.
They are served.
They're served. Oh, okay. Good.
I would just offer an anecdote that I heard yesterday. We were in Grand Rapids talking to the economic development folks, realtors, and county commissioners about the broadband situation up there. And one of them had just done a ride around with a young couple who was a new resort owner, and they were specifically brought up the fact that they were having to modify their business model because the resort that they purchased didn't have access, and guests now demand access, and so they were being left at a competitive disadvantage because this wasn't available to them.
Governor, what are we looking at here in terms of numbers of underserved folks here in the state? Is that available here?
We gather data once a year, and so right now we're just about to get new data. We don't have that data, but as of last year, there were an estimated 252,000 households that were unserved. And I would estimate that number is going to come in closer to 200,000 when we get the data back from this year's gathering.
Businesses as well on this topic?
How about underserved?
I apologize. I can get that number to you.
Anything else on this topic?
Yeah, besides the vague term Greater Minnesota, is there a geographic area that is hurting the worst right now? It has the least service?
We actually there are 13 counties that have less than 50% of their households met with the goal level of service, and they actually are represented all across the state. We have Yellow Medicine being the least served county in the state. We have one or two counties on that list from the Northwest, but then another area that is particularly challenged in this area is the corridor just north of the cities.
So we can provide, you have county by county breakdown of percent, so we can provide that.
We absolutely do, and I can provide that with you, to you.
Given we're now talking about the last 10 to 12%, is this the time to expand the state's policy to be more flexible for different technology like wireless?
That's a good question, and what I like to point out is that the state's policies currently allows wireless, and so we have funded a number of wireless projects, and we're watching to see how they serve the communities that have chosen that as the option.
Thank you very much. You're going to go back in the office. If I survive, I'll go back. I'm not there in an hour, send out a search break.
Governor,
You want to go back to
Governor, the Senate had a bill, or talked about a bill on ranked choice voting yesterday. The House is taking up this container, the House committee is taking up this container bill. You vetoed the labor standards last year. Now preemption seems to be coming back from many directions. Do you feel like stopping it, or is it something you want to stop?
Well, I haven't looked at the details of the bill. If it's capping it where it is now, that's one thing. I'm not saying I'll support that, but if it's going to roll back what Minneapolis and St. Paul have established, which in this last election worked very well, you know, for St. Paul, Mayor Carter got 50+% the first ballot, and Minneapolis rolled over quickly. And so, you know, until I hear from an outcry from people in those cities that they want to change, I don't think it's appropriate. You know, there are a lot of areas, because of the very different nature of our systems. I mean, there are places in Minnesota that still have paper ballots and are counted by hand. So, I mean, there are areas where it's really not practical. I haven't seen a rush all over. Duluth has it, I believe. But, you know, it's one of these things where everybody talks about, well, the need for preemption because we're going to have this patchwork quilt all over the state, and it isn't happening. So I guess I don't see the need for it at this point.
What about for other issues like the container ban or ride-sharing services, things like that?
Same thing. I mean, local control. Republicans are supposed to be for local control, and giving citizens access to the nature of their community is best served at the local level. You know, and we talk about various marketplaces. If somebody gets out of line, then businesses or whoever go over to their neighbor just across the road, another city. So I mean, I think things are balancing out themselves by their own nature. And if St. Paul and Minneapolis think that the minimum wage should be $15 an hour, which I support, and the state's locked in at $9.50 plus inflation for the foreseeable future, I mean, that's a big difference. It's a big difference to a lot of people who go to work every day and work for whatever the minimum wage is. It's a big difference for them and their lives and their families. So I don't see, everything, when they talk about conformity, they talk about rolling back. They talk about meeting even in the middle or meeting, near the trailblazers, be one thing, but it's those who don't like it want to reverse it and go back, and I don't think that's a profitable approach.
Is your attitude the same on, as my colleague mentioned, the Uber and Lyft regulations? Some say that we've got potential drivers there that are not screened properly for criminal records statewide. Ought there to be a statewide regulation of Uber and Lyft?
Well, screening, no, I think it should remain local. But it should, there should be a requirement for screening, and the companies first and foremost have that responsibility. But local governments should have that oversight as well.
So the state should not do it then?
Well, it's just so fluid. I mean, you got people signing up as, from what I understand, as drivers, and then leaving, and so who's gonna? You're gonna have to back it up so that people have to register and get background check and get licensed, and then who's going to take care of that? And they're serving one community or another. I mean, it's just too fluid an arrangement right now to be amenable to the kind of standardized control that some people are calling for.
You talk about one greater Minnesota issue with broadband. Another one we hear a lot about is child care. It's lacking everywhere. Tell me what your priority is, where that falls in your priority list, and a little bit more about what you'd like to see the legislature do.
Well, we increased the funding last year for children who are seeking private child care and on a subsidized basis. So we've increased what the care providers receive from the state you know, and the rest of it is really the private market economics. I mean, what people can, you're providing childcare. And I believe me, having had both of my boys in family daycare, I mean, those people are saints. And with the hours they work and what they go through and provided on a quality basis, just, you know, life-saving. But, you know, the economics of what you can charge parents in the private marketplace, what they can afford and still be able to, you know, put their children there. I mean, I hear from some of my staff the cost of one child, even more, 2 children in childcare is just, you might as well send them to Harvard. But, you know, it's, so, I mean, I don't know how much more the state can do to relieve the pressure. And the other thing that's going on is with the job market is so tight, is tightening. People are looking for other work. People who work in these facilities are finding other better employment, higher paid employment elsewhere. So, it's, you know, it is a real challenge. It's one of those challenges that comes with a thriving economy. And I don't know what, frankly, the state can do.
One of the child care providers say the state over-regulates, too picky when they go inspecting, and that.
Well, then you look at some child who's strangled because of some substandard, you know, I mean, we're trying to prevent that from happening to any parent. And, you know, every business thinks there's too much regulation. And you know, from their perspective, there is. But again, we're trying to cover a whole state. We're trying to prevent that incident from destroying some family's life.
Other questions?
Governor, what's your, maybe we won't have just talked to you before the break, or maybe we will, but what's your assessment of the session so far, and what are the big stumbling blocks for the rest of it?
Well, as I said, I think the success finally in getting the MNLARS emergency funding, the transfer of money, was a real decision point, whether they were going to send me a bill bereft of the areas I objected to that I could sign, or whether they were going to send a bill that they knew I was going to have to veto. And they, to their credit, the legislature, both House and Senate, they agreed to and sent a clean bill, relatively clean bill, and that was, I think, a good indicator that we can work things out and work together. I was delighted that they sent an employee contract bill that was clean, didn't have poison pill amendments attached to it. I think that was very responsible. Hope the same thing will happen with pensions, which the Senate's passed. The House will refer to committee, but I think that shows promise of progressing. So I mean, I think those signs have been encouraging, and you know, as we all know, the next 2 months, close to it, after they come back, is where the real crunch occurs, and we'll have to see what happens then. But I say so far it's voted well. The discourse has been civil. We've had bipartisan leadership breakfasts, which have worked well every 2 weeks since the beginning, and those have been cordial and constructive. So far so good.
Governor, can you give your thoughts? The House committee late last night authorized construction of the Enbridge Line 3, and that is now heading to the House floor.
I can't believe that the author seriously thinks this bill is anything other than enhancing some people's reelection prospects. I mean, it's just so, it doesn't trample, it destroys the integrity of the Public Utilities Commission process, which has served the state so well for decades. I've said this before, whoever established the PUC as a separate entity, insulated from the legislature, from the governor's office, from the politics, to make these, you know, really complex and vitally important decisions, was brilliant. And it served the state so well, and I will oppose anything that will compromise, or in this case, destroy that integrity of the Public Utilities Commission and that review process. And this one is just ridiculous. I mean, just to say the legislature's going to take it over and just say Enbridge can do whatever they want and it's approved. I mean that doesn't take us back to the 20th century. That takes us back to the 19th century.
You would veto that bill if it reaches the House?
Yeah, for any insight into your Supreme Court vacancy, you scheduled interviews or anything like that?
I've interviews scheduled the week after we come back, and 4 excellent candidates. It's going to be a tough decision, but as all the commission does its job so well, that it makes it very hard to select from. But Minnesotans are guaranteed to have another really outstanding associate justice just because of the caliber of all 4 of them.
Are you taking next week off?
I'm sorry?
Are you taking next week off?
I'm going to be here. I'm not going anywhere. I've got a couple of things, but yeah, I'm not going to go look for trouble.
You don't get enough trouble when you stay here?
Well, I guess I can manage it better when I'm here. If I go away, that's when trouble is almost guaranteed, you know. I mean, it's sort of like if you carry an umbrella, you know, it's not going to rain. If you don't, well, if I leave, I know it's going to be some kind of disaster. So for the good sake of the state, I stay here. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts on the state attorney general's lawsuit against the tobacco companies who are allegedly not making payments in part of the settlement back in the 90s?
Well, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. But if they're not, you should go after them. If they got an obligation to make their payments, they should darn well make their payments. But I haven't seen a report on that one. Even my policy staff shaking their head here. So you can tell us where to go and find that. We'll something look at it because you know, yeah, she should absolutely go after them.
Thank you.
Thank you.